thought I'd talk a little bit about the nursery space that's going to provide all the trees for the orchard. Just a cool little aside, this is a plant called Manihot grahami, different than Manihot esculenta, which is variously known as yucca in Mexico, or arrowroot, or it's what they make tapioca starch out of. And theoretically, it could be hardy to zone 5B, 6A, where we are. At least I'll mulch down there around the roots and hopefully keep the roots alive. For whatever reason, I've been looking for a woody perennial with edible roots. I thought that would be cool. So these two beds were made mostly to house all the trees that were going to go into the orchard and other plantings here. And so the soil was dug out to 1 shovel depth, and this is a walkway looking straight here to the right of the grapes and between the trees and the grapes. And then there's another walkway down the middle of these two beds. It was very easy to see a couple of months ago, and now not so much. You can see that, so we dug 1 shovel down basically until we hit subsoil and mounded the beds up. And so the beds are probably, 18 or so inches depth of nice topsoil. And then we planted things in. Some of these are grafted trees. This one here is a cool variety. This is theoretically the latest blooming apricot that exists that I could find anyway. It's from very far away, somewhere in the Middle East. I got scion wood, and hopefully that will help. I have a little breeding program going on to get later blooming genetics for apricots, because it's just kind of silly. It doesn't take the fruits all season to mature, and yet they bloom so early that they lose their flowers at 2 out of 3 years here. They don't have to do that, so I'm gonna try to convince them otherwise. Anyway, you can see the trees here are planted very closely, and we're talking like 4 or 5 inches center to center, and they go down for quite a ways. So these here are some grafted and some cherry plum, and we've got nut trees, aronia. So most of these trees, now these are up to just about 6 feet tall, these peaches. And I started these communally in air prune beds last year from seed. And so I planted out 1-year-old seedlings. That's a block of apricots there. And the 1 year in pots, well, air prune beds, we'll talk about, I'll show you a little bit later. I have crates for the farm that are called RPCs. They're collapsible crates, and so they're slotted for vegetables, and it makes a nice unit that you can fill it with some kind of decomposing wood chips and some soil, plant seeds right into it, and then take them out in the fall once they've grown for 1 year in there. The roots are really nice and easy to remove with the air prune system, and then you can plant them out in a nursery bed that fall or the next spring. And the whole reason for that is just that planting the seed right in the ground, all of these species that we've been looking at, for the most part here, are not species that I normally direct seed where I'm going to grow them, because rodents will come in and just move them all around. It's actually kind of hilarious. They won't eat all of them, but they'll take the seed and they'll plant it somewhere else, so they're not in the nursery bed anymore, and it might grow there and it might be fine, but it's kind of a little bit too chaotic. So with those, I find it much easier to plant elsewhere. To plant in the the air prune beds where you can kind of monitor them and keep out rodents with exclusion netting until they germinate, because really you just have to kind of wait until the seed or the nut is mostly exhausted of its nutrients, and then it can kind of come off, and then the rodents are really no longer interested in it that much. These are American plum here, which I find is a really, well, some of them are really just good in and of their own, but they can also serve as a rootstock, a much more resilient rootstock for peaches, plums, apricots, things like that, than most of the rootstocks that other commercial trees come with. So you can see here, there's really, I have more trees here than I can possibly fit in my orchard, and it's really not a lot of space. These are just really only 2 beds that are 40 feet long, and each one has about 800 trees in it. And I could have planted them on the higher density. I mean, these are really, really nice big stock. I mean, you know, if you buy something from at a real official nursery like Stark Brothers or something like that, you're not going to get that much of a bigger tree. Well, maybe they'll have a little bit of a bigger diameter, but I find it's always the root system that I'm most interested in, not the top growth. And in these nice, deep, loose beds, they develop really good fibrous root systems that take really quickly when you put them into the field. So other pertinent things are just that after we planted, these were all planted this spring in here, as I said, 1 year old, from seed, planted in the spring here, and then while they were still dormant, heavily mulched with wood chips and some biochar. You can see inoculated biochar went in with the chips and sometimes on top, and that was holding a lot of nutrients in the form of urine that had been stored up during the winter. And basically the maintenance on this has just been a couple rounds of light hand weeding to get the stuff that comes up through the wood chips, and pretty low maintenance, all things considered. And last year these beds were home to a patch of really rowdy mugwort with some old greenhouse plastic that was here from the previous owners. A big mess to untangle, but in 1 year it can be turned into really productive space. And if you mulch the trees heavily with wood chips, these were kind of decomposing wood chips, so they weren't going to rob a lot of nitrogen. If you do that in the spring, you can really prevent the germination of the vast majority of the annual weeds. We did a lot of forking to make sure that we got all the perennial root balls out, because the mugwort and the goldenrod, they're a whole different story. You can bury them 8 inches down and they'll find a way up. So that's just a couple thoughts on how to generate plenty of trees if you're planning on planting out a nursery. Anyway, thanks for watching.